Right, so it's going live now. So we've got it. Good. Okay. So it's 6 minutes past 6, which is a good time to start. And we last week I mentioned that we would be doing looking at ancient Egypt, and we'd be looking at a site connected with the ancient pyramids at Giza. Now, it's not exactly the ancient pyramid complex, but that ties in. It's something that we're familiar with, so that's what I wanted to do. And we'll look at the temple at Nosos, and try to sort of understand how the relationship of these areas actually work. So I'm gonna do from the top now. Probably not a wise thing to say, but I've never been to the ancient pyramids at Giza, but naturally it's something that I visited many times in various presentations. And
I have. I nearly got shot.
yes, it's a shame you weren't, Pete. You'd have another story to tell us.
I climbed up on one of the loose stones, and you weren't supposed to do that.
No. Oh,
I picked up a bit of Knossos.
And you've been to Nosos.
I picked up a bit of pottery there.
Yeah,
okay.
and I was scammed as well at the pyramids. There we are, another story.
You were scammed. Go on, tell us the scam. Go on quickly. You know.
Yeah, well, I hired this walla for a camel ride, didn't I?
Oh,
so around the back, and when they were around the back, he buggered off with his camel somewhere else. But there we are. It happens to everyone. It happens to everyone.
All right. Then, if we're gonna do nice anecdotal stories, I got to tell you one. Right, the year is 1983. It's only 8 years after this, the Turkish Cypriot War. My dad goes with me to Nicosia. It's just me and my dad, and we go to. There's a border post in the middle of Nicosia, and you can see shrapnel damage all around you. And my dad, being an absolute idiot, I don't know who I take after. He climbed up on the steps, right? He went to the border post, right? Only to be surrounded by Turkish Cypriot soldiers with bayonets at his throat. And one of them said, "If you don't leave now, we're going to shoot you." So it does happen, right? It does happen. So that, everything aside, we've got that now. We're not going to go. We'll see if there's any views from last week and whatever at the end. So that's what we'll do. As we've been talking about the shape of the line and access and movement, it is good to look at two areas that we might be more familiar with. Except we are very familiar with the pyramids at Giza, but we might not be familiar with the labyrinth, the Egyptian labyrinth, which we will be looking at. So let's look at Nosos first, because that's where the images take us. And this is a site of, obviously, that some of you are aware of. So let's just sort of do that screen sharing thing there. Love it. We like a bit of screen sharing, and let's just get in there. And oh, hang on. No, we don't want that. Nope. Right. What we need is this. Now, straight up, we got a plan of the Nosos sort of site. This great palace, this great sort of palace with multiple rooms on multiple levels. Now, this is obviously the ground floor level that we're looking at, and we're thinking of this palace complex being as complex as the word complex is, and this sort of gives us all those stories associated with the legends of the beast of Nosos, and we're talking about the legends associated with bulls and all the rest of it. And we'll probably stay away from there, because I just wanted to sort of look at this sort of diverse complex. And if you sort of go into it there quickly, and you go courtyard, you've got entrance ways, you've got corridors, you've got various rooms, you've got storage rooms, you've got various chambers, everything's there. And this makes something like this very, very complicated in regards to access. How do you approach a site like this? How do you understand a site like this? And again, this is the level of complexity that archaeologists have a complete nightmare with. So it'd be nice to sort of get an idea of what this site sort of looks like. And let's sort of look at a few images. It's always nice to have a few nice, colourful images. So there we go. We've got a map of Crete, and it's hang on a minute. If we just want to, hang on, we've got to have a better map than that, so we can actually zoom in. The maps ain't very good on this one. Oh god. Okay. Okay, now that's clearer. Good. The Nosos site near Heraklion. We can say that Nosos itself was overlooked by Heinrich Schliemann. He wasn't really interested in Nosos when he visited there in the early 1890s. It was a site that Arthur Evans excavated and made his name into the 1920s. This is when I'm talking, I intimated that this would be an archaeological nightmare. This is an archaeological nightmare for any archaeologist. We like to keep things simple. If we're excavating, it's good to have a room, and then you've got another room and a corridor, and that's it. But not a corridor and a corridor and a corridor, collapse level, something underneath, a basement, this bit there, stairs, here, there, everywhere, right? So it's a bit of a nightmare. And when we think about the Nosos site, it's very much linked with the sense of the labyrinth. It's linked with the sense of the ending of a civilization. It's talking about a civilization that was mighty great at one stage. And I've got my little notes in front of me, so we'll refer to some of this as well. So this site itself, we could say, is probably at its height around the time that the Minoan civilization collapsed or started to collapse. In that year, that fateful year, the eruption of Thera and Santorini, and we're looking at the year 1628 years BC to the day. And what we do, the unfortunate thing that we do find about Nosos is the actual interpretation and excavations that have brought us a dichotomy in archaeology. And the dichotomy is if we sort of go away from that and we think about all these grand reconstructions. The problem is this is in the eyes of what Arthur Evans thought the site may have looked like. Whether or not it actually looked like this, we don't really know. Now, this is showing multiple levels. You got like a ground floor level, and then you got first floor level. You might have a second floor. There are other basements and chambers and all the rest of it with this site, depending on which way you look at it. And it makes life for me as an archaeologist very, very difficult to interpret what we're seeing. And it's always the danger of any archaeology where you're excavating, and archaeology is inevitably destructive. So you're taking away those layers. We think about the palace of Nosos, eventually becoming one of the core centers of Minoan civilization. And it did linger on. It lingered on for a couple of hundred years after this great event with Thera. But slowly but surely, the palace was lost in time. Now, interestingly enough, we think about an explosive population. And when we think about this explosive population, there was a huge urban landscape in regards to this palace and the surrounding area. Now, when we think about it, we think about a population in regards to Nosos and the surrounding area, something which is, for me, very unbelievable, looking at this is 1,628 years BC, 3,700 odd years ago, of a population of up to 100,000 people, which would make it one of the most densely populated landscapes anywhere in Europe at that stage, anywhere sort of in the Middle East. You know, it was greatly instructive in how we see civilization being at its height, and with the eruption of Thera at its utmost decline. So, you know, we think about this sort of Minoan period. We think about this palace complex probably being begun about around 4,000 years ago. So it had sort of a life of at least 300 years, and lots of things are being added to it. Now, one thing that we do find is the introduction of the staircase, right? And I don't know if this is a concept that we're going to get across. I do blasé, right? The staircase is a revolution in prehistory, right? It means that you can get from one level to the next. That may sound really condescending. That may sound really, that's just so obvious. But really, when we think about the landscape that these sites are constructed in, what we don't really see is the sense of stairs, because, you know, people, if you want to compare it with, say, a village in Bronze Age Britain 4,000 years ago, in the south, there's no such thing as steps. It's just ground floor level. There's no ground floor. There's no first floor. There's no second floor. It's just ground floor stuff, right? So this is what I was saying last week when we were instructing you about the construction of those blocks, stairs, and having buildings that are very tall in a prehistoric landscape. I know we're talking about the Iron Age. I know we're talking about 1,000 years after this type of site, and anything that I'm describing in Bronze Age Britain. We can say that anything that is taller than ground floor level it would be the tallest structure you will have ever seen. That's one thing I didn't mention last week when we were looking at blocks. I should be saying that, for example, hang on a minute. I'm just trying to enlarge. For example, as a person who's used to looking at buildings from ground floor up to roof level, the tallest building that you're ever going to see in your life is only 4 meters tall. But when you start adding a floor onto a structure, a first floor, a second floor, or revolutionary, a third floor, or you can have a ziggurat in regards to the Sumerian civilization. There's those great pyramidal step things with great grand staircases and level upon level upon level. These are mighty things. These are your tower blocks of prehistory. So it's trying to work out the mindset of people who are actually building these things, and it's also in relation with the expanding population. If you've got an expanding population and numbers of the population are inevitably growing and growing and growing, the concept of extra stories on a building would appease the increase in population. So this is really, really important. So it was a necessity to go higher rather than spread out. And again, this is a revolution. And instead of having the concept of wooden ladders to get from the ground floor to the first floor, you invent steps. So if you're looking at the sort of reconstruction of this palace complex at Nosos, we can only get a feel that the buildings were of this height. In the excavations of Arthur Evans, we do find that there's evidence of basement, ground floor, first floor levels. At a push, maybe something of a second floor level, right? But that's the most, right? Here, you're demonstrating ground, first, second, third, fourth roof space, right? So this is taking a leap of faith. And how could we guesstimate that? Well, it's all about looking at the stonework on ground floor level. And what we mean by that, Roger, shh. I'm just gonna mute Roger a minute. Roger, I have to hang on. Let's mute Roger. There you go. Don't tell him. I've just muted him. Don't say a word. Good. Anyway. So again, another one of these like reconstructions, and again, it's movement around these types of places and how everything works, and it's nature and nurture. It's access to water, access to greenery, and if we want to think about if one thing that is really dominating our thoughts when we look at civilizations like this, as we look at civilizations like the people at Çatalhöyük in Turkey, is what's going on the roof level. And we're starting to get evidence from places in the Middle East, the Israeli landscape, that we're actually getting evidence of lots of beehives within a housing landscape. And what that within the prehistoric world and within those flat roof levels, even though the flat roof levels have collapsed, we've got evidence of beehives. And what that tells us is that people must have grown plants and had flowers and all sorts of things on their roof spaces to warrant having beehives that would have needed flowers to pollinate in the first place. So we look at lots of inferred archaeological evidence when we're trying to understand how a landscape like this is inevitably working and connecting with the wider framework of how a human mind is evolving. And again, I can't stress any more how different a series of steps would have been, and we got the evidence at Nosos, how different a series of steps would have been as compared with using a rope ladder or just a wooden ladder. It makes things easier. Access to levels is a lot more straightforward. Can I make something very, very clear? And probably, if everyone can, you've been really good so far. So let's just, I've got to get into this flow. Movement around buildings is not as straightforward as people think. So say, for example, you're infirm and you've had a fall, using steps would be a nightmare, right? My granddad, when he was getting into his, into 91, 92, he used to struggle, even though he was still working at 92 and 93, my granddad Noah, he could only work on flat levels. He actually had a paid job at 92, right? But he couldn't go in the office or anything, and he couldn't walk up steps because he just couldn't move his foot onto a step and then go onto another step. So he had an aged disability, right? So do you see how cumbersome steps can be to certain sections of society? Because access on ground floor level is accessible to everyone. By offering steps, it means that access is a little bit more precarious. And if you're a little bit infirm, steps can be a barrier. This is a very key point. All structures, well, when I say all, most structures that human beings create are done in the mindset of controlling movement around buildings, right? And we mentioned this before. You've got a front and a back door. And if the front and the back door's locked, you can't go in that building. If the front and the back door's open, you can go in that building, right? This may sound just too obvious stuff, but it's not. This is how our human mindset actually works. It's called access analysis. And the other thing as well is, if you've got a loft in your house and you know where the ladder is to the loft, but nobody else does, then nobody's going to go in the loft. And the point is it's all about control. A building like this is about control and movement, control movement around the building. It's the same as defenses. When we looked at the Brock structures last week, I mentioned about movement and control and how things actually work over periods of time. So what it would be good to do now is look at that plan, right? Let's look at that plan. But there's a word of warning which I'm going to put in there, right? So the word of warning. So let's oh God, where's that little map? Where's my little map? Right there, bingo. Right. The word of warning is that when you look at this Nosos map, explore this Minoan site in Crete, right? When you look at this, you think, right, okay, it's just straightforward, but it's not. Archaeologists have interpreted this site as being as it is. In other words, what we're saying is that archaeologists are presuming that this is how the site looked and may have always looked, but it didn't, because there are additions. And if we want to think that there are different ways in, there's the south entrance there, there's the west entrance, north entrance, and is there an eastern entrance? Yes, there is. And this idea of a maze or a labyrinth, more like a labyrinth. One thing about this landscape, this vista as a building, is to control your movement within a building. Say, for example, if you wanted to get to the central court and you didn't know where the central court was, you could be wandering around this for half an hour and not actually getting to the central court. You could be going down the corridors. You could be going up steps. You could be going down to the first floor level, the second floor level. You could be going onto the roof space. You could be looking down into the central court. So the point is, it's all about movement. All these things are all about movement. So looking at the key again, and what we do see. Oh, there we go. We've got this main chamber here. You've got all these key rooms. The 40s here. You've got, for example, the Queen's bathroom, for example, at number 41. And you've got the Queen's dressing rooms at number 42. So these are really all special rooms. And you can imagine that as a commoner, you're not exactly going to get access directly to these special chambers, but it's very close to the east entrance. So what's going on there to stop people actually getting into these main rooms? However, I've just made a classic mistake, and I was phasing that into a classic mistake. The classic mistake is that I'm presuming that the way this is all structured and this is all based, and we've got all the rooms right and we know what's going on, is based using a modern mindset that maybe you shouldn't have had access to the kings and queens, right? but maybe there was a different reason why people didn't have access to these special areas. One thing that we do know is that Minoan civilization was an extremely wealthy civilization. In fact, even the most lowliest of people within this civilization, the most lowliest, had a level of wealth. So when you think of how the Minoan civilization is expanding, is based on that level of wealth and infrastructure that this civilization is all about. So I'm just gonna try and look on. Just move my notes up a little bit more. Oh God, do I do this? Yeah, I think I do. I think I do. Now, I think we've talked about the beasts that may have frequented in legend the palace at Nosos. We've mentioned bulls, and into the mythology, the legendary King Minos. King Minos is said to have dwelt at this very palace. And it's said that this palace was so constructed to represent a living labyrinth. And when you think about it, when you're actually looking at this, it is a living labyrinth. So if we go on to a reconstructed image, let's sort of look at a reconstructed image. That's sort of, there we go. Do you know what? One thing I do like about archaeology is the idea of reconstructed images. There you go. It's a nice little bit of reconstructed image. There's a throne room there, and there's the central court that we mentioned. And look at this here. There's level upon level. People would have been completely tranched by something like this. And if you come from a culture that is on ground floor level, how did you take to this? How did this work? It's almost as if you're introducing a New Guinea pygmy to a modern building. It's going to be a very difficult concept for them to take. Not only is the building hard and solid from what they're used to, it's on multiple levels, and let's not even think about electricity and gas and water and all the rest of it. We think about again within Greek mythology, we think about the construction of the labyrinth, a very large maze-like landscape. And this is the legend. This is not why the thing is constructed. This palace is constructed over hundreds of years. It said a very large maze in which to retain his son, the Minotaur. So in other words, Minos had a son who was a Minotaur. He wanted to sort of contain the Minotaur. And the name Nosos was subsequently adopted by Arthur Evans. So we're thinking about Nosos as being the name for the site, but the name for the site would have been probably very, very different. As far as is currently known, it was a certain American consul who had published some of the early discoveries made at the site, including double-headed axes. And the idea of linking Greek mythology into this direct site is because of the labyrinthal ruins that were found. In fact, Arthur Evans believed himself that this was the backdrop of the story associated with King Minos. This is the place because it was just so complicated to excavate. The myth of the Minotaur tells that Theseus, a prince from Athens, whose father is an ancient Greek king named Aegeus, the basis for the name of the Greek sea, the Aegean Sea, Aegean Sea, sailed to Crete, where he was forced to fight the terrible creature called the Minotaur within the bowels of the labyrinth of this great labyrinthal landscape. So to try and explain what we're looking at on the screen, the Greek mythology had to try and make sense of having a very complicated landscape, a labyrinthal landscape. So let's just chuck a Minotaur on there to try and understand it. Why are all these rooms, and how do we understand why are there so many rooms? You know, why is it on multiple levels? Why is there this room? Why is there that room? Why can't it all be on one single level? So Minotaur was half man, half bull, and was kept in the labyrinth, a building like maze. So the mythology actually explains the site at Nosos. It explains it by making it a labyrinthal myth. It was not constructed to keep a Minotaur. Back to the story. The king's daughter, Ariadne, fell in love with Theseus. Before he entered the labyrinth to fight the Minotaur, Ariadne gave him a ball of thread, which he unwound as he went into the labyrinth so that he could find his way back by following it. Theseus killed the Minotaur, and then he and Ariadne fled from Crete, escaping her angry father. So we're talking about this is this to understand. Sometimes we go to paint and understand the past by making up myths and legends, and that links us directly into the labyrinthal story that we actually get with our labyrinth in ancient Egypt. One thing that we can say is that this sort of maze, this labyrinth, was retold on Greek pottery over and over again, and again, this landscape, this vista of buildings within buildings. Corinthians, in my house there are many mansions. We know what we're talking about, and in my house there are many mansions. Look at it. It's absolutely stunning. So to try and understand what's going on, this story of King Minos was invented to try and explain the palace at Nosos. However, that there's one downside with all this, is that there are other palaces. There are several other palaces like Nosos spread across the island of Crete, and what we've got to do is actually start to think, well, you know, this is much bigger than just a single story, a myth to explain the site of Nosos. Again, it's fascinating. You could do a whole presentation about this site and new findings. And you know what? One other thing I do love is cutaway images. I love them. And look at that. How complicated is that? You know, you're thinking within the mindset of somebody in prehistory, but this is not in prehistory. This is highly civilized, and you're just thinking, you're going to say to somebody, all right, you know, in that building over there, you've got to go in that room next door to this, and you're thinking, well, you're never going to find it. And again, to aid access to the different levels, you need steps. You can't have rope ladders and all the rest of it. I love cutaway images like this. You can just get lost in them. They're just so brilliant. And there's lots of windows, and there's lots of doors, and there's lots of thresholds. And look how complicated that little network of rooms is there. And you've got these steps, and it's just it is very much labyrinthal. And I'm sure actually there's one little bit of a truth in the story. If you had a ball of string, you could probably find your way in and out. And also light's going to be a very important factor as well, light and dark, because obviously if you're going to be going down these corridors, you need a way of lighting these corridors, and it's this idea of light and dark. And when you think about it, this site is only going to be accessible to somebody who's completely able-bodied. If you've got any kind of walking disability, you can forget going to visit this site, because to be honest with you, an able-bodied person would really struggle with this. Anyone with any problems with walking, anyone with any problems with steps or anything like that would get completely lost. However, would a blind person be able to find their way around this landscape? Right, that's a really interesting question. Would a blind person? So if you sort of squint your eyes and you think you can't see any of those rooms, you're an able-bodied blind person. So you're able to you're able to walk around this sort of landscape. Hang on a minute. God, do you know what? I've lost that image. Oh, bugger. Hang on a minute. Let's just try and get some of the ruins. Oh, that image just disappeared. Hang on. Oh, hang on. It was you, wasn't it? Right, hang on. Just sort of go back. Oh, crumbs. I've just lost it. It's like suddenly looking and finding a reconstructed image and just sort of. Right. Okay. Let's just go with this one. This might help us. So if you're blind and you're sort of looking at. Well, you're not looking, right? So, sorry. If you're blind, if you can touch and feel and get a sense of the walls and the pillars, and you do that over and over again, very ritualistic, you could probably make a mind map and to be able to get through this site very easily. And you would have an advantage over somebody who was sighted, because when you think about a complex like this, there would be areas that would be very dark because there's no light, because you've got level upon level upon level. So the only way an able-bodied person is going to be able to walk around this huge labyrinth, this labyrinth for different reasons, they would always need a lamp. They would always need to be able to light their way, but a blind person would be able to find their way as long as they had a mind map. And that's a really, really interesting point when we're thinking about how a site like this worked. And when archaeologists start telling you about a site like this, they start saying, well, you know, there's like the palace room, right? And they might say, okay, there's a room of frescoes and the sort of jumping bull design with where you've got the athletes, all these different rooms and so on. But it's a lot more complicated than the simplicity that is offered to us by these reconstructions. And I think it's important that we think outside the box when we look at sites like this, and we started to think, well, how did this all really work? And take us away from sort of ritual and ceremony. Do you know in my notes in front of me, I glanced over it, and I'll just share this. The writer of this piece says that the Palace of Nosos eventually became a ceremonial and political center for the Minoan civilization and culture. Why does it have to be ceremonial? Why can't it just be practical? This is extremely complicated to be a ceremonial site. It's very ritualistic in the way you're actually going around it, but that's how the mind works rather than associated with some kind of great religion. So what we're going to do, we're going to move away from that now, because I did actually promise that we're going to actually go to ancient Egypt. So let's try and fit a little bit of ancient Egypt in there. So if we go off that, and again, a reminder of our complicated map there as you sort of access the site. I love it. Different storerooms.
Carl, can I make a comment?
Yeah, go for it.
Is it worthwhile having comments now about what you just talked about, or leave it till the end?
Actually, it would make sensibly. I tell you what, we'll have comments now. I'll just finish my thing, right? When you've got authors saying this is ceremonial landscape, one thing that I can remember when I was presenting a lecture about just the Knossos site over 2 hours, I remember sort of saying that it can't really be a ceremonial site because, you know, even in the little thing there, it says you've got a room that could be a prison. Right, okay. How can you have a prison and a ceremonial site? You've got like a palace area, right? How is that ceremonial? And then you've got this sort of giveaway word. Let's go to 29. 29 are actually the potters' workshops. So in other words, this is almost as if it's everything. It is everything that the Minoan world is, and it's broadcasting everything that the Minoan world is. So it's a microcosm, mind map of how the Minoans think. And if you can look at the mind map of the Minoans, you can truly understand what the Minoans are all about. Right, it would be good to get any questions now, Bill. That's very sensible there. Let's just stop the screen share a minute, which would be very, very useful. Let's just get off the screen share, and we'll come to our Egyptian site for about 15 minutes. So, Bill, go for it.
Yeah, if you go to Nosos, it's on a rocky escarpment, and if you wander around there, it's difficult to picture exactly what was going on. So to come up with a sort of picture that you just come up with would have taken a lot of effort, a lot of surveying work, if it's accurate. I found it difficult to find out what was going on. I tried to find water channels to get some idea of fresh water in and waste out. I couldn't. But on the eastern side, the escarpment falls steeply down to a ravine. And there's certainly a lot of greenery down there, which shows evidence of a dried up watercourse or semi-dried up watercourse. So I think there'll be plenty of water, etc. The other lovely story I've got to tell you, and I think I mentioned this to you before, Carl. When Arthur Evans was excavating, there was no evidence at all of writing on what the civilization called themselves.
Linear A and Linear B, yeah.
Right. I think you'll remember what I'm going to tell you now. When I was out there, I started talking to a local historian, and he said that Arthur Evans got very friendly with a farmer who owned the land on which Nosos stood, and used to visit him regularly, for drinks and foods, etc. And when the discussion came about what do we call this civilization, the farmer said, well, I don't know, maybe my dog Minos can actually help you, So according to this local historian, the ancient Minoans were actually based on the modern name of a dog. Now, I'd love to believe that story. I really would.
Minos Minoan. And, that really makes sense because that really does make sense, because I think it was on the back of Schliemann that we didn't have a name for this civilization. In fact, I think the key point with this is that we've got ancient Greece. We can establish ancient Greece about 600 years BC. The constructions at the Parthenon around 450 years BC, that type of thing. And we're talking about Herodotus around then. We're talking about Homer a little bit before. We can set ancient Greece. But what everyone knew about ancient Greece, right? On the Grand Tour, young lads like you and me, Bill, would have gone on the Grand Tour, and we'd have gone to Greece, and we'd have gone to Rome, and we would have eventually gone to Egypt. Nobody knew about this pre-Greek civilization. And there was a whole pre-Greek landscape that nicely balanced with the ancient Egyptian world. What we do see is we've got ancient Egypt, and we've got the Middle Kingdom, and we've got the New Kingdom, and we're looking at 3,500 years ago. Who are these people involved with? And we know that there was a clue that there was people somewhere in Greece that Egypt was involved with, right? Yeah. But we didn't know who they were. But the other thing as well is these were pre-Greek, but they were within the Greek landscape.
Yeah.
And what Arthur Evans was up against was nothing. There was no basis in academia for this new world. So to be honest with you, naming it after a dog, I think is a good idea.
Well, believe it or not, but I think it's a lovely story.
Well, to be honest with you, Indiana Jones is named after the dog, isn't he?
Indeed.
Right, I'm looking forward to the new film. Right, anyone else want to say anything quickly before we go on to the next bit?
Yeah. The thing is that, sorry about the phone call. The thing about jumping over the big bull, you know, that the youngsters took the horns and jumped over the charging bull.
Yeah. The acrobatics, yeah.
A lot of people said, oh, that can't be done, but it has been done in recent times by athletes, somebody pretty fit, sharp, to actually do it. So that part is true. The Minotaur, it could have been based on that sort of challenge of getting over the bull and not getting caught with it, and developed into something a bit more mysterious, because that whole palace is a labyrinth of all sorts of everything. And that diagram you had labeled something as the Queen's room and all sorts. Well, we don't have a clue what they are. It's senseless, really, putting anything on. You don't know what they are. And why they have them arranged that way, you could make a plan, ideas, yes. But I don't see how they could have said it could have been the Queen's room and all other things on there.
Now, you know, this is a key point, right? We've got what you've done. You've gone with the evidence. So the evidence is that we've got the evidence with the obsession with bulls, right? There's bulls' horns everywhere, and you know, we've got the throne room and all the rest of it. But when nobody actually questioned when I was saying that's a prison and that's this, but we've got the evidence of the workshops. We know we've got workshops there, but in the gravitas of the situation, we're presuming that those very grandiose rooms are the rooms of the kings and the rooms of the leaders, right? They could equally be the rooms of the local sort of organizer, or there may have been a yearly ruler or something. So what we're doing, Roger, within 100 years, right? Remember, Arthur Evans was opening the site around 1920. That's only 100 years. So up until 100 years ago, the Minoan civilization didn't exist. So everything that we understand is actually being built up through the palimpsest of history. And the other thing as well is there was great competition on the island of Crete between British and Italian archaeologists. For example, we've got the idea of the Phaistos disc that's like a labyrinthial disc, and you know, these type of the Phaistos site, and the Italians are working at. You've got the. It was a largely competitive thing, and probably let's just do it, Rog. Let's just go with an image again, just quickly. Probably one of the reasons for the reconstructions is to compete with the Italians. I think it's to basically try and we don't want that. Is to basically if we go with that. And we bring in a Nosos, and we type in the Nosos site. So the reconstructions are more to do with competition rather than accuracy. And I think your point as well is, how do they know all this? How do they know this, Roger? There's a lot of reconstruction there. We're hoping it looked like this. There's some evidence that it looked like this. We know that the frescoes offered us some detail, but you are very right in being critical, and that is a very good point. I think everyone's points has been really good. So anyway, we got to do the next bit quickly. So anyone wants to say anything? No. Okay, good. Let's crack on. So what I'd like to do now is, if we're thinking about how things worked in ancient Egypt. The linear line is God. Movement, not the arch, right? The line, the linear line, the angle, 360 degrees, and all the rest of it. Getting things precise. And this is one of the things with the pyramids at Giza. Everything's at the precision level. But a few years ago, when I was looking at some very interesting things. I was looking at the wonders of the ancient world, and there was mention in one of the lists of the wonders of the ancient world, there was mentions of a labyrinth somewhere in Egypt. right? And nobody had found it for years. And it was as intriguing as these great pyramids at the Giza plateau. So the Great Pyramid of Giza, the Pyramid of Havre, and the Pyramid of Menkaure. And basically you've got the Sphinx and all these other things that people think about, and the construction of this landscape is 4,600 years ago. 4,600 years ago, we had just opened the final edifice at Stonehenge, right? So we're building Stonehenge, and this is what this civilization is building in ancient Egypt, right? So I need to look at something different. And I thought, right, what I wanted to do was I wanted to go with this. There you go. Egypt breakthrough through how a 2,000-year-old mystery was solved after lost labyrinth was discovered. So there we go. Archaeologists found what they believed to be a lost labyrinth. So there we go. Going underground is all these different rooms, amazing stuff. Egyptian archaeologists uncovered what is believed to be the remains of a lost labyrinth below the sand of a famous pyramid site in what was previously thought to be a mythical structure. So this labyrinth, up until about 2019, 2020, was thought to be a bunch of mumbo jumbo. Was thought to sort of be invented. And the discovery was made in Dashur, an archaeological site 90 kilometers south of Cairo, where the tattered remains of Pharaoh Amen Nemat III's Black Pyramid can be seen today. The huge mortuary temple that originally stood adjacent to this pyramid is believed to have formed the basis of the complex of buildings with galleries and courtyards called a labyrinth by famed ancient Greek historian Herodotus. So in other words, in Egypt, what comes into history is a labyrinth. This idea of the labyrinth being controlled within a distant number of rooms, and we'll show you what these labyrinths actually look like in a moment. With no visible remains, the story was thought, no visible remains above the surface. With no visible remains, the story was thought to simply been a legend passed down by generations until Egyptian archaeologist Flinders Petrie uncovered its foundations in the 1800s, leading experts to theories the labyrinth was demolished under the reign of Ptolemy II. Ptolemy II was the son of Ptolemy the Great, the great general. So Ptolemy II was around roughly about 300 years BC, and used to build the nearby city of Shadit to honor his wife Arsinoe. And the one thing as well is it was thought to have been lost, right? But it was found. So if we go back to that there, and I did have some images earlier on, so I'm just gonna have to type this back in. Egyptian labyrinth. There we go. There we go. Google search comes up with straight away. So this is what we're talking about. We're talking about this Black Pharaoh's pyramid. And again, look how complicated that is. So the description is that from what they found, you would go down and you'd go within all these different rooms, right? And it was a great arrangement. This again described by the great Herodotus, who is actually telling us in the 450s years BC, he has actually given us the list of 7 ancient wonders, and there we go. This is basically what we're saying. This sort of existed underneath the surface. So if I sort of type back in here on my other computer, and we got the lost labyrinth. Hang on a minute. Lost labyrinth. Let me just get there and there. Lost labyrinth in Egypt. We type that one back in, It's fascinating, this, and I've got another great reconstruction on the computer. I don't know if we could just sort of see if we can get. That's a nice little one. What they're actually saying is that there was some stuff above the surface, and this actually belonged below the surface. And if I just sort of move and just type in that one there, these notes are really good. We've got to do this before we go today. And you can see that that's a very our ancestors were really into the idea of the labyrinth and sort of becoming lost. There can be no doubt that Egypt is a land of deep ancient mysteries that stretch back many millennia into the mists of time. Here is an enchanting land of magnificent ruins, soaring pyramids. Hang on a minute. Hang on. Oh God. Soaring pyramids and darkening tombs surrounded. Hang on a minute. My computer's playing up. Oh, come on. Right. Okay. Surrounded by whispers of curses and black magic. It is a place that indeed leads us. And one of these is about this. One of these great mysteries of ancient Egypt is a subterranean network of tunnels and chambers that was whispered to have been lost and destroyed by Ptolemy II, but it was not lost and destroyed by Ptolemy II. The almost mythical lost complex known simply as the labyrinth to the ancient Greeks, and it was actually thought that this was actually where the original story of King Minos actually came from, and there was so much written about this sort of labyrinthal sort of landscape, and to have actually sort of been eventually found in 2018, 2019 is absolutely phenomenal. And they basically pieced everything together, and it's the upper chambers themselves were destroyed, but the lower chambers are believed to more or less be completely intact. And it's said that some of the earliest pharaohs are actually buried within this labyrinthal landscape, colonnades and courtyards within colonnades and courtyards underground. Over the whole of these is a ceiling made of stone. Is this so you've got what's above ground level, so what you've got below ground level. This is an account. Over the whole of these is a ceiling made of stone like the walls, and the walls are covered with figures carved upon them, each court being surrounded by pillars of white stone fitted together most perfectly. And at the end of the labyrinth, by the corner of it, there is a pyramid of 40 fathoms upon which large figures are carved, and to this there is a way made underground, but a cause for marvel even greater than this afforded by any great lake. And this has been so written about and so marveled upon. I just wanted to sort of bring you this as one of the great mysteries. And what I will do now is, despite these frequent historical accounts of the magnificent labyrinth of Egypt, it has long been seen as being possibly a myth and a legend, but it's not. Again, one of the first attempts to seriously find and study the labyrinth was in 1842, when King Frederick the Wilhelm IV of Prussia led a team with the archaeologist Richard Lepsius, who was quite famous in all this. By 1888, famed Egyptologist Flinders Petrie tried to debunk this. However, when he was excavating within the landscape, he found stonework that spread over an area of 1,116 feet by 800 feet, and archaeology that was 6 feet below the surface. Flinders Petrie debunked this theory, and then he found out that this was a truly colossal landscape under the ground, and this was in fact the labyrinthal landscape. So very recently, just quickly before we finish today, it was only in 2008 that the Harawa pyramid, because there's 90 odd pyramids in Egypt, not just the three, Harawa pyramid, they claimed to have found lurking within the sands using advanced technology evidence of chambers and rooms and tunnels and thick walls, enormous chambers below the surface. However, they couldn't really excavate because the whole thing had been flooded by groundwater. So even though the lost pyramid of Egypt has been found using modern day technology, it's been very difficult to excavate, to actually get down there, which is a bit of a shame. But I'm sure one day they'll be able to do that. And one last thing about this sort of Egyptian labyrinth, which I will say, it is unclear. Here we go. Let's just read this sort of. It's, however, after finding all this, some in the Egyptian government denied the images that they were being shown, denied the myths and legends of this great chambered corridor landscape that had been found by the archaeologists in 2008. So the myths and legends are still out there. The myths and legends about something practically found. And the great labyrinth of Egypt is as great as the great labyrinth of Nosos. Whereas Great Labyrinth of Nosos is extremely complicated and very difficult to make out, as Bill said, and that's what I've been saying from day one. This great pyramid, this pyramid in Egypt with this great labyrinth will offer us a great labyrinth that you might be able to explore, but we're doing it using modern day technology rather than excavating below the surface. As we said, it's completely flooded, and it would be very dangerous to work within those chambers and corridors. But the legend is now an archaeological fact. So anyway, I thought we'd do that this week, something very different. Back to a bit of British archaeology next week. Are there any questions?
Yes, I have, Carl.
Go for it.
I'd like to know where Flinders Petrie found evidence of the subterranean chamber in relation to the distance from the Great Pyramid, because remember, the Giza Plateau is rock, and I can't imagine anyone actually constructing a labyrinth on the Giza Pyramid plateau. Certainly off it, and that would be possible, but I just don't buy it that it's actually on the, especially when you mentioned it was flooded. If it was flooded, it couldn't be flooded on rock, because the Giza Plateau is exactly that. It's a plateau which is raised above the normal landscape, you know. So I think there's a bit of mystery about all this, and need to dig further, I think. And
we need to dig further. Exactly. That's the thing. We need to dig further into this sort of labyrinth. So it's a mysterious labyrinth that's been found by modern technology and discovered by Flinders Petrie in 1888. But it's just one of those things that we've got to sort of try to understand. The idea of
if it's there, I don't think you'll find it on the Giza Plateau. Personally, let's wait and see.
So, what was that strange noise of like a witch? It sort of sounded a bit strange. Right, okay then. Who else wants to say something? Right, okay. What about you, Peter? Anything you'd like to say this week?
Well, just about the pyramids. I remember when I went down inside one. They are so big inside, and to go in there, we had to go down this path within the actual pyramid. You went down for almost 100 meters, and then you went up into the inner chamber for almost, again, another 100 meters. It was absolutely enormous, the inside of that. So it was quite easy for a labyrinth to exist within that.
I think this this thing about labyrinths, when you look at the tomb of Seti the Great in the Valley of the actually more or less opposite the tomb of Tutankhamun, this sort of underground labyrinths of it's one of the things with the chambers and pyramids in ancient Egypt is like having false chambers and false corridors. to sort of lead people in a different direction. So in other words, what you're doing in life is with a building, you're trying to make people go upstairs or make people go in that room after they come in through the front door, and you got a front and a back, and you got a certain room for this and that, and you don't go in that room because you're not supposed to, and all these different things. It's all about control, but also in death. In many instances and in many other cultures, you might actually have a burial chamber, but actually the real burial chamber is down a hidden corridor to another room, right? So even in death, we try to control the movement of people, even though you're long since gone and you can't do anything about it other than the structure you've actually built. So when we think about labyrinths, it's very much within our mindset and within our psyche. And to actually control and make people move in a certain way is very important also. What about you, Roger? Roger, anything?
Yeah, is there anything that's coming from the depths of the Sphinx? Because I reckon there was more to the history of that than we found so far.
The problem is with the
labyrinth under the Sphinx anywhere that's not been found yet or obvious. Any clues?
As Bill said, if there's anything around the labyrinth, it's going to be something very, very well sealed. And is very well disguised, and that's why it hasn't been found. Obviously, the plateau where the pyramids is set is quite solid. So finding hidden things is very difficult. But within this site, in regards to the labyrinth, obviously, we're getting something to tell us, something of a mystery within the labyrinthal movement. Across these other sites across the Mediterranean, including Nosos. So, anything you'd like to say, Steve, before we finish?
It was just a very quick question, Karl, around what evidence is there for sort of pre-planning of these? I mean, we've found them being hugely complex labyrinths, hugely complicated corridors, etc., etc. How much evidence do we have that they were actually pre-planned, or did they just organically?
Organic.
It was just purely organic in terms of we'll just add another thing here and here and here and here.
Yeah, well, if you look at Nosos, as I said, it was a development over 300 years before you get to the final site, 1,628 years BC, before Thera erupts. And then obviously it's used for a little bit of a period after that. So it's very organic. Stonehenge is very organic. Nobody sat down 2,000 years earlier and thought we're going to have that eventual blue stone over there, and we're going to have a sarsen stone like that with a doodah on top. We're going to have a bit of tongue and groove. No, nobody ever thought about that. In regards to the way things are done in ancient Egypt, we never talk about things in ancient Egypt as being organic. We always talk about them as being very set, very controlled, and very learned. However, if we're talking about this sort of pyramidal complex that we've been talking about in Egypt, maybe it was added to. Maybe there was extra corridors as things got bigger and bigger. There was a movement to add new things, and it's in many circumstances we don't see anything really set in history and archaeology. Now, for example, the Pantheon and the Parthenon. Within a Roman and Greek concept, those types of structures were actually planned and organized. But if you look around the Parthenon, all the other buildings are just organic. That you've got a big, huge, massive temple to Athena there, and then the rest of it's been added. So none of that other stuff was planned. The original thing was that we're going to put this massive temple in the middle to Athena, and that's what's going to be. And then you've got the little temple of the sirens there, and you've got this other thing, and you've got a wall around it, and you've got all the other sub temples. None of that was planned, so all that's been additional.
Right.
So nobody at Nosos suddenly turned around and woke up one day and said, "What we're going to do? We're going to have a 6-story building. We're just going to." Basically, what happened is nobody actually realised you could do that. Nobody actually realised that you could actually have stairs going. So somebody then sat down and said, "Oh, what we'll have stairs going up there. That's what we're going to do. It makes good sense." So that was not the original thought when it was constructed 4,000 years ago.
Right. So it was just it just became an evolution of effectively a of a building environment, living environment. They just add more.
It's a mind
Evolve.
evolution. It's a mind evolution, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
You know, it's like anything. Nothing, very little's been pre-planned. For example, if we want to look at this metaphor, Germany could have actually lost the war in 1939 if Russia hadn't invaded Poland, right? So the whole course of the Second World War would have been very different, right? But the Germans never ever thought that they were going to invade Poland and then be defeated in 1941 with the massive invasion of Russia in Barbarossa. The Germans didn't know they were going to be defeated. Nobody ever planned any of that, right? None of that was planned. So when you want to look that on an archaeological level and to try to understand our complex civilizations, everything's the same. It's all organic. And the best example of that is Stonehenge. It's just the way it's happened. Stonehenge is a ridiculous example of something that was never planned. Which idiot decided that we're going to put a stone over there, and 100 years later we've got to get that bloody thing out of the ground and move it over there. I've never actually been convinced when we actually do Stonehenge in our main classes. You won't see me siding with most archaeologists who say, "Oh, we put a stone in that hole, then we took all that effort to get out the hole, and there's no evidence to show how we got out the hole, probably because it was never in that hole in the first place." But when you think about Stonehenge, there's so much more than just the blue stones and the sarsen stones, but that's a development over 1,000 years, if not 2,000 years.
Okay, thank you.
Amen.
Okay. Right then.
Okay, so Roger, Steve, Bill, and Peter, is there anything else you'd like to say before we finish?
So,
Very good.
So we will be signing back in next week. We're going to be doing a little bit more about prehistory next week, and we'll be looking at that sort of development. You know what that development of access, i.e., trackways and walkways. We'll be looking at the Somerset levels, various tracks there, and trying to sort of link that in with what we're doing with movement and lines and so on. So that's what we'll be doing next week.
Okay, good.
Okay.
Hang on, before you go, Anne wants to say something.
Can I briefly say we might have a lady coming, we might have two ladies coming tomorrow.
Oh,
Rose and someone else.
And
But Rose is eager to come back.
Oh, well, hang on.
I know, yeah,
Rose.
Rose. Good for Rose, yeah.
Good for Rose. Right, so what we're going to do, boys, if you haven't got anything else to say tonight,
good night, all.
Steve, I will see you
Bye,
next
see you,
week.
thanks.
See you next
Yeah.
week, Roger and Bill.
Thank you, Carl.
Very
Yeah.
much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye-bye, boys. Good night.
Bye-bye.
They're good, my
Bye.
boys. They are. They're good. They're good, my boys. They're good, my boys. They're good, my boys.
Yeah, they are good.
They are good. So sorry to bite into your time. I did apologise, but it wasn't as bad as last week.
Wasn't it?
No,
Oh,
not
I
last
don't
week.
know.
I went over like 25, whatever. So
It's 19 now.
so Anne, I'm going to stop the recording on this, then we'll have a quick
Oh,
chat
sorry.
anyway.
Yeah.
Everybody, thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe to YouTube channel.